Okay, in the previous video, we discussed about the cross-section and how it's drawn at the level of the inferior colliculus of the midbrain. In this video, we're going to talk about a cross-section of the midbrain, but now at the level of the superior colliculus. If you are starting with this video, I would suggest and urge you to go and watch the previous video, the first video on cross-sections, in which we discussed about certain concepts and certain things that are kept in mind when you're going to be drawing a cross-section or when you're going to be talking about a cross-section. Briefly going over those four things that we talked about, how any cross-section would be needed to be drawn keeping these four things in mind. So the first thing is going to be any ascending fibers or tracts that are going through that part of the brainstem, any descending fibers or motor tracts that are going to be passing through that part of the brainstem, and then any fibers coming out or emerging from that specific part of the brainstem, and any characteristic features or structures that are present in that respective part of the brainstem. We also discussed how the brainstem can be internally divided into three sections. The first section is going to be called what? If you've seen the previous videos, it's going to be called the basis of the brainstem, or specifically in the case of midbrain, it's also going to be called as the crus cerebri. So basis, in midbrain we specifically call it the crus cerebri. Then we talked about how internally the middle portion, the middle part, is going to be called as the tegmentum. That means covering. So this part is going to be called as the tegmentum. And then we talked about that the posteriormost part is going to be called as the tectum. Tectum meaning roof. So this is going to be called the tectum. And this will be the general arrangement internally throughout the brainstem. But in the case of midbrain, we call basis as the crus cerebri. We also talked about how the anterior third of a cross section is mainly going to be having all the descending tracts or all the motor tracts. The middle portion or the tegmental part is going to be having all the ascending tracts or the sensory tracts, and also the cranial nerves and their respective nuclei. And then we talked about how the tectal region is mainly in the midbrain is going to be having either superior colliculus or the inferior colliculus. So let's start off with the first structure, that is the easiest, that in the tectal region you're supposed to only draw two circles that represent what? They're going to be called as the superior colliculus in this section. The previous one had the inferior colliculus in this very part. So superior colliculi in the tectal region. Then we also talked about how the basis or crus cerebri is divided or separated from the tegmentum area by a structure that is going to be present in both the sections of the midbrain, and that is going to be what? That is going to be the substantia nigra. So we have the substantia nigra over here, again, which is a nucleus concerned with the motor system. So let's label that as substantia nigra. Okay, and same on the opposite side. And we talked about how this is the cerebral aqueduct. You're going to draw that. That is going to be the separating medium between the tectal area and the tegmentum. So the area behind the cerebral aqueduct is going to be the tectal region, and anterior to it till the substantia nigra is going to be the tegmental region. Okay. Now we've made a certain outline or a general outline of the midbrain. We also talked about how it's going to be this shape because of the presence of the interpeduncular fossa that is specific to the midbrain and is a characteristic gross feature. If we move on to these four facts and to complete them, let's move on to the first one, that is the fibers that are coming down or descending motor fibers. We know that they're mainly going to be present where? In the basis region or the crus cerebri. And which major tract, one major descending tract do we have or do we need to remember? It's the corticospinal tract. And it's present only in the middle third of the anterior part of the crus cerebri. So we'll just make this over here and write corticospinal, or also called as the pyramidal tract. Corticospinal corticospinal. Okay, and there are other descending tracts over here as well. Over here we have a tract called frontopontine tract. Here we have a parietopontine tract, but those are not important at this stage or for this cross section that you guys need to draw, because you need to draw the main things. So we have the corticospinal, we have the substantia nigra, and so we have completed this part. We have completed this. Now coming on to the ascending fibers or the sensory fibers, right? So sensory fibers, we know that there are two main sensory tracts that you need to be aware of at this stage. One is the medial column lemniscus system. So this tract is going to be called as medial lemniscus. Then we have the spinal lemniscus, which is going to terminate, one of the fibers of this spinal lemniscus is going to terminate at this level, that being the spinotectal, which, as the name suggests, is going to go from the spinal cord to the tectum, but tectum of the superior colliculus that is housed in the tectal region. So we need to draw medial lemniscus, we need to draw spinal lemniscus, we need to draw a trigeminal lemniscus, and we need to draw a lateral lemniscus that is exactly the same as the previous diagram that we drew. So let's draw that. We talked about how it's going to be present in the tegmental area because it's a sensory tract or sensory tracts, but it's going to be a bit lateral and not in the center, even though the name suggests medial lemniscus, but still it's not exactly in the center. So let's just draw, and they are conveniently usually drawn together. Okay. So we have these over here, and then they are divided because we are making them collectively. So they can be labeled. This is the medial lemniscus. Then we have the spinal lemniscus. Some books say that this is the trigeminal lemniscus and this is the lateral lemniscus, or it could be vice versa, right? Same goes for over here. Spinal lemniscus, medial lemniscus, spinal lemniscus, trigeminal lemniscus, and then lateral lemniscus. So we've made the important ones, or the main tracts, ascending tracts, that are present in the tegmental area of the midbrain at the level of the superior colliculus. Okay. Now we need to consider, we've done these two facts or concepts. Now we need to consider any specific structures that are present in this very region. And we do have one. There's a structure called red nucleus that is not present throughout the midbrain, but only at the level of the superior colliculus. So that won't be drawn in the inferior colliculus level cross section. It's again a collection of gray matter. It's a nucleus that is concerned with the motor system. So it's posterior to the substantia nigra, right? So I've drawn this structure way too big, but they are present over here, right? So this is going to be the red nucleus. The red nucleus. And this is specific to this part of the midbrain, and you have to draw that in order to get full marks. So red nucleus, which is posterior to the substantia nigra. So that was the specific structure that was present in this part of the midbrain. Now we need to talk about any fibers, any cranial nerves that are going to be emerging from this part. We talked about how the inferior colliculus would house or would have the trochlear nerve that is going to exit posteriorly. This part or this cross section is going to have the third cranial nerve that is associated with the superior collicular level of the midbrain's cross section, and that is the oculomotor nerve. And we know that oculomotor nerve is a motor nerve. So that nerve's nucleus is going to be placed very, very medial or close to the cerebral aqueduct. So let's draw that with a green marker. So we would draw the oculomotor nerve nuclei over here, and we need to draw the nerves that are emerging from it. They're not going to emerge posteriorly, not going to cross like the trochlear nerve. They're going to come out anteriorly and in the interpeduncular fossa, right? So this is going to be your oculomotor nerve. I think it only has one C in it. So this is going to be the oculomotor nerve. That is the third cranial nerve. So we've made this as well. Now some books do not show this, but we know that this nerve, even though it's motor, I mean it is motor, it also has another component within its nerve. And it's taking those fibers as well. And that is the parasympathetic fibers that are going to go to the smooth muscles of the pupil, right? The nucleus concerned with the parasympathetic outflow with the oculomotor nerve is a nucleus that's called Edinger-Westphal nucleus. And you need to draw that because that is important. And you can draw this nucleus right next to the oculomotor nerve. And you can show the fibers going from it with this oculomotor nerve. Right? So this entire nerve is the oculomotor nerve. And this orange structure is the Edinger-Westphal. I'm running out of space, so sorry guys. Edinger-Westphal nucleus. After that, we also have one structure that is going to be present throughout the brainstem. And again, it's a structure, it's a tract that is connecting certain cranial nuclei of one side with their counterparts on the other side. And that tract is called what? It's called medial longitudinal fasiculus, that is concerned with conjugatory movements or synchronized movements of your eyes, of your neck, or your head. So we would have that near to the midline as well. So let's draw that as well. We'll draw that with pink. So we can draw that near the midline, right? And this is going to be medial longitudinal fasiculus. These are the main things that you need to draw in this cross section, and thereby you have the complete picture, drawn picture of the cross section present at the level of the superior colliculus of the midbrain. Some books also show that we know that red nucleus, the motor fibers that are going to come from the red nucleus are called rubrospinal fibers. If you want to draw them, you can, but you need to draw them crossing over to the opposite side in this very region. So I don't want to cramp it up, but if you want to draw them, you can draw them like this. So these are your rubrospinal. Rubro means red nucleus related. So rubrospinal tract. And it crosses at this level when it emerges from the red nucleus. If you want to draw that, you can, because some books show that. So this is the complete picture. The remaining part in the tegmental area, all of this is reticular formation. If you want to label that, you can, but these are the main things that you need to draw when you are asked to draw a cross section at the level of the superior colliculus. So again, brief overview that whenever you draw a cross section, you need to keep in mind just the general outline or shape of the structure you're drawing, let it be pons or the medulla or the midbrain. And then you need to keep these four things in your mind at all times when you're drawing the cross section, right? So I hope that this video was helpful. It was shorter than the previous one, so that's a positive sign. And if drawing a midbrain cross section comes in your exam, I hope that you'll be able to draw it now. Bye. But you need to keep in mind that even though the basis, tectal, and tegmental region, generally we talk about how they're going to be present throughout the brainstem, when the spinal cord converts into the brainstem, the junction between the medulla and the spinal cord, everything changes gradually, right? So what happens is that the spinal cord gradually transitions or gradually changes into the medulla. When you draw the cross section of the medulla at the level of the spinal cord and the medullary junction, you're not going to have this basic arrangement that we've talked about. We're not going to have all the motor tracts in the basis. We're not going to have the ascending tracts in the tegmental area, because right now the spinal cord has not fully transitioned into the brainstem. So when we're going to talk about the medullary cross sections, you're going to see that it's going to be a little different from the concepts that we've talked about. The reason for that is that the changes occur gradually. And when you ascend up the medulla usually in the books it has 4 cross sections. So the two that are the main important ones at the level of the motor decussation and the sensory decussation, they're not going to have this basic arrangement that the motor tracts are going to be in the basis mainly. Ascending tracts are going to be in the tegmentum, and tectum doesn't really have a lot of things except for in the midbrain. So we're going to talk about that when we talk about the medulla cross section.